Here is what my Photoshop looks like when I open it up, and this is a 2:3:5 aspect ratio template that I use when I'm storyboarding on films. In the template, you can see, as soon as I open it up, there's 3 layers here on the right. I have this gray bar, which is where I write my dialogue. I've got a ready-to-go blank layer, and then I have a white background. And if you notice, the gray bar here and the white background, those layers are locked so that I don't accidentally draw on them. The other thing I want you to notice when I work in Photoshop, I try to get rid of all the tools and windows and things that I don't use. Color you'll use every once in a while in storyboards, but not that much. I've got layers here, and then I've got this tab, which is called layer comps. And this is the real star of the show in terms of storyboarding, and I'll show you how to use that. So I only ever use 3 brushes when I storyboard, and you can see them here in my tool presets. Tool presets are basically just saved brushes that you've created. So the first brush I use here, these two are actually the same, is just a basic sort of pen marker brush that sort of gives me thick and thin lines as needed, especially if you blow it up. And I use this to draw my characters. I generally put my characters on one layer here. And then I have another brush, this Q stick down here, and this is essentially what I use to add a little bit of texture and shading to the drawings. Not much, but just a little bit, so that kind of pulls it off the background. So if I were to add a colored background, black, drop the opacity. The only other brush I use is this cell shading brush, and what that does is it essentially paints behind the lines on the layer that you've drawn on. So that allows me to fill in my character with white. And those are the only 3 brushes I use. Again, I'm all about speed, economy, and workflow, just making things as easy as possible. I don't want to be sitting here trying to select different brushes to give me different textures. Unless there's something very specific you need to sell in a storyboard, I would advocate for just using as few tools as possible so you can draw fast. Next, I want to talk about hotkeys and shortcuts that I use. On the Cintiq, which you can't see right now, there's a little sidebar with buttons that looks like this. I use 3 main buttons. The middle one I use here. I've set it to basically be the hotkey X, which is toggling your foreground and background color. And the reason I do that is because when I'm drawing a character, a lot of times if I make a line that I don't like or something, I don't want to have to switch to an eraser or a different tool to fix it. I just want to be able to fix it quickly. So I hit the X button, I hit that hotkey, and then I can actually just draw with white rather than needing to erase. So let's say, oh, I don't like that. I just hit the X so I can turn to white, get rid of those, hit it again, go back to white, hit it again, go back to black, and that way I can just draw again really quickly without needing to break my workflow in terms of going and getting and selecting different tools. The other button I use that's down here on my Cintiq is set to Alt, which is the eyedropper. And sometimes I use that because if you're cleaning up other people's storyboards or if you want to get a different kind of color like a gray, I can just select that really quick and again, just keep drawing. Make a new layer, set it to multiply to give them a little bit of flat shading. I can just select this gray, that gray, whatever I want, and then just drop that in really quick. The last button I use, which is this button on my sidebar on the Cintiq, the top one, is a hotkey that I set to trigger an action that I created. And you can see here, I opened up my action menu, and there's an action that's called 80% layer. So if I hit that, watch what happens over here in the layers. What it does is it creates an 80% transparent layer, white, and then a brand new layer that I can draw on. And the reason I do that is to create an onion skin effect when I'm storyboarding. So if I create a panel and I just want to draw on top of it, then the next one, I just hit that button, gives me a clean panel to start drawing on. Let's say we had a character here, so I'm using my main brush, and we're going to drop this character in here. And then let's go ahead and make a new layer and put a character in the foreground. The other thing I do is I toggle on the keyboard the brackets to make my brush bigger and smaller. Again, very fast. So I made it bigger to draw this character in the foreground here. Now I'm going to add one more layer, and let's just put a quick background in here. I'm going to go ahead and turn the opacity on that background layer down just to pull the characters out. Now I'm going to switch to that other brush I use, shading brush, and then I'll give my other character here a quick rim light and a little bit of shading. So let's talk about layer comps now. So I made this drawing. I've got the characters on different layers, and I've got the background on its own layer. Now, layer comps is a tool that basically takes a snapshot of whatever layers are visible. And the way you can access layer comps is through Photoshop Windows and layer comps right there. So you can see mine's already checked because it's visible. And I drop it right down here below my layers. So right now, if I want this to be my first panel, what I do is I go ahead and I hit this button, which creates a new layer comp. And it gives me this window here. The very first time you create a layer comp, you want to make sure all of these 3 things are checked. And what that means is not only is it going to take a snapshot of what what layers are visible, it's going to remember the visibility, meaning the opacity, the position, meaning where you've placed those layers, and appearance, which toggles the layer style if you're triggering something from a normal layer to a multiply layer. You hit OK, and you can see here it made layer comp 1. Now when you check those 3 boxes, every time you go back and make another new one, they'll already be checked. So you don't have to check them every time, but make sure you do it the first time. So we've got our first layer comp, our first panel. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create an onion skin, and let's say this boy is gonna wave and walk off. He's gonna look back to the boy as he's walking. He's gonna wave, all right, see you later. Deselect my onion skin. I'm gonna deselect my character from the first one. I'm going to make sure I shade him in and fill him in, so there's continuity between the panels. And now I'm going to create a new layer comp. There it did, new layer comp number 2. So now this is where we get to toggle between panels. So you can click here in these squares to go back and forth between 1 and 2. Or you can use these arrows down here. So that'll toggle between infinitely, see? So it's going back and forth, back and forth. So these are essentially the panels that I'm creating to storyboard. So let's say I want this character to walk off now, and I don't want to have to do more drawings. All I need to do is take that layer, slide him over. Now if you notice, the background's bleeding through. So this is where I take my cell brush, which fills in the drawing, and I'm just going to paint on that same layer, which draws behind the lines and fills him in. And now I'm going to create a new layer comp. And because position is checked, it's going to remember where he was the last time I made a layer comp and where he is this time. Hit OK, and now look, I go back and now he's walking. And I didn't have to do any more drawing. I just had to move him. And let's do one more. And then create one more. Dunk, dunk, dunk. He's still walking off. And now let's toggle him completely off and make one more new layer comp. And now I have a whole shot in one Photoshop file using my layer comps that's going to toggle through all those poses I made. So here's something to be aware of with layer comps as you're working. So we have all our shots here. If I were to take a drawing and delete that layer, if you notice, it's giving me an error in all of these layer comps. Because what it's saying is something that existed, a layer that existed when you made those layer comps, doesn't exist anymore. If I undo it, I only deleted this first pose that we had. So watch this. If I delete him again, if I accidentally delete that layer, it gives me a warning on all of them. But if I toggle through my layer comps, the other guy's still there because I didn't delete that layer, but the main first pose is gone. Let's say I made a new layer and made a sun back here. Let's say the director said, hey, make sure you put the sun back there. So I made a new layer that wasn't there when I started and when I created that layer comp. So I can do 2 things. I can basically create a new layer comp because that layer's new. So if I create a new layer comp, hit OK, it moves the new layer comp all the way down to the bottom here. And what I can do is I can drag that layer comp up, see here, to where I want it to go, so at the top. So it's going to take the place of this first one I made. And now I can delete that first one. Boom, delete that one layer comp. So now we've got the sun in the first one, but not in these other ones. Okay, well, what do? Do I have to make a new layer comp for each one? Nope. All you have to do is go to the layer comp you want by clicking this square here, right? Whichever one you want. Toggle on the new layer you created, and then you can hit this recycle, this refresh button here. So now when I refresh that, you see it, this square gets filled in with that white symbol, which means it's been updated. So now if I toggle, the sun's there, but not here. No problem. Again, turn the layer on, refresh. Next panel, turn the layer on, refresh. Next layer comp, turn the panel on, refresh. And now if I toggle through my layer comps, 1, 2, 3, 4, the sun's there in all of them. So let's say we wanted the character to change size and scale through the layer comps. Let's do a new drawing where he's going to turn away and he's going to walk backwards away from us. I deselect the other character. I have my new one. I'm going to use my shading brush really quick. Just fill him in a little bit. Now I need to make a new layer comp. Again, you could hit this button here in the bottom corner, new layer comp, but that'll put the layer comp all the way at the bottom and I'll have to drag it up manually. So what you can do is you can take your layer comp that you're on and drag it to that button and it'll make a new one right there and then just hit refresh. And now when I toggle through, dunk, now he's going backwards instead of going to the side like he was before. So now let's say we want him going backwards in space. What happens if you scale that layer? So I'm going to hit Control T to scale him down and I'm going to move him where I want. I'm going to drag that layer comp again to make a new one and hit refresh. So he should be going backwards in space now. Not quite. Watch what happens. He's the same size in both panels. Why did that happen? Because layer comps remembers what layers are visible. But if you make any effect, a drawing effect or a transformation on that layer, it's still the same layer visible. So how do we do that? How do I make a layer comp where he's scaling down? I'm going to undo what I just did. Now I want him to walk and scale down. All I have to do is take this layer of him that I drew, duplicate the layer. I'm going to deselect the other one and then make a new layer comp. Again, grab this one, new layer comp. But now I'm going to scale him down. Refresh the layer comp. And now, because I made it a different layer, see, dunk, dunk. Now he's going down. So we got 1, 2, 3, and he's walking away in Z space. If you look over here, as I toggle through these layer comps, it brings up what is visible when it was created. 1, 2, 3. How do we get layer comps out of Photoshop? Photoshop has a built-in action, and they've moved it around in various versions of Photoshop, so it may depend what version you're on. But essentially, if you can find the export menu, you can see here, layer comps to files. So you click on that and it brings up this window here. So first you want to select the destination where you want these panels to be exported. And here, if you check it, you can choose to export either selected layer comps or all of them. So if it's not checked, it'll export that whole list of layer comps. If it is checked, it'll only export the ones that are selected. And then here you can even select what file type you want it exported as. So JPEG, you can do a PDF, you can do a PSD. The PSD will have all the layers in it. I generally use JPEGs when I storyboard. They're just the easiest files to manage, to send back and forth, to send editorial. And then you hit here, run. Photoshop is going to go through each layer comp there, export it. Layer comps to file, successful. So where did they go? I'm going to open up the other program I use when I storyboard, which is Adobe Bridge. As you can see here, it exported all of my layer comps as panels. So these are all JPEGs now. Generally, I'll build probably about 2 or 3 shots worth in a Photoshop file of layer comps and then export those out to Bridge, start a new Photoshop file, and start on my next few shots. Adobe Bridge is the other program I use when I storyboard, and essentially I use it as a viewer to view all of my storyboards, to move them around and to rename them and keep everything in order. You can scale it up or down, you can view them in grids, and you can view them as a list. You can view them as just their file name. So it's just like a folder. So why do I use Bridge and not a window viewer? It allows you to move these files around and then rename them. So if you have shots that you want to move around, if you take a panel out and you want to rename again to keep everything in order, that's what Bridge will do. But let's say we want them to move faster and we realize we don't want this drawing anymore. So you can do one of 2 things. You can literally just delete it. Hit delete and it's gone. Now he's going faster, boom, boom, and he's out of frame. But when you delete from Bridge, it deletes the file. So just beware of that. It's just like a folder. So there's no way to get it back if you delete it from your trash bin. It's gone forever. But if I undo here, it will bring it back. What I tend to do in Bridge is I make a new folder. I call it 0 cut. Take that panel and I just drop it in that folder. So now I have my new sequence in order without that frame. And if I ever want it back, I know I always have it. So when you have all your panels organized through Bridge that were exported from Photoshop, what you can do now in Bridge is rename them all so they're all in order. First thing you want to do is you want to hit Control A to select all. Now don't worry about this folder or the files in that folder. It won't affect that. It'll only affect the main folder that you're in. So I hit Control A to select all of these panels, and you can go Tools, Batch Rename. And then it brings up this menu, Batch Rename. Here, where it says text, you want to put in the new name of your file. So I'm going to call it test sequence underscore V1. Then you go sequence number, and that's going to basically put an extension on it. I tend to use 4 digits because when you're doing storyboard sequences, sometimes they can get up into the hundreds of panels, meaning you want those 4 digits available for you if you have to rename them. Down here, this is the current name of the files, and this is going to be the new name that it makes it. Test sequence V1 000. So you know what? We're actually going to start that 0 at 1. And see there, now it goes 001. I'm going to hit rename. As you can see here, it renamed all my files. File name test sequence version 1 001, 002, 003, 004. So another thing that happens with Bridge when you do the batch renames is, let's just say we're going to duplicate these panels here. So I hit Control C and Control V to paste them. It made duplicates and it saved them as copy, which is good, so that it's not replacing them. And let's say we just want to drag them in so it looks like he does a little dance. Now it's like, dunk, 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 dunk. So he's going back and forth, back and forth. Now when we hit Control A and Control Shift R to batch rename again, it's the same file name that I want, but see how it says 8 here? The reason it says that is because last time there was 7 files, meaning it already named 1 through 7. What Bridge is assuming is that I want to start from there and keep going, but that's not the case because I want to rename from the beginning again. So all you have to do is replace that with 1 and it'll rename everything again in order starting in 1. If you forget to do that sometimes, it's not a huge deal. It'll still number and name and order everything correctly, but it might just start at 008, which isn't a huge deal. You can just batch rename again and start at 001 if you want to. But let's go ahead and hit batch rename. So here's an example that I was talking about where Bridge could be glitchy. So what it has done is it has named them all correctly, but it hasn't put them in order correctly. And I know that seems weird considering the only reason Bridge exists is to name things and put them in the right order. But if you look closely, 001, 0002, 003, and these are the new ones here where the names actually changed from the previous version. And as you can see, they are not in the right order. 008, 009, 004, 005. So Bridge named them correctly, but it didn't put them in the right order. So every time you batch rename, all you have to do is right click and go sort by file name. And now it has put them all in the right order. So Bridge named them right, but it didn't put them in the right order. What happens is if something's out of place like that and you don't realize it, the next time you batch rename, it'll rename it where it sits now, currently in the construction of the sequence, meaning it will be out of place and then will be named improperly and will mess up all your panels. So always just go sort by file name.